Very good morning, I am Shilpa. Welcome you all to the NCERT live phone-in program. And our today's topic of discussion is A Photograph, which is a poem from 11th standard English book Hornbill by Shirley, Toulson. And to discuss further in the studio we have Dr. Meenakshi Khar, designated as an Associate Professor at Department of Education and Languages in NCERT. Ma'am, I welcome you on the show.
Thank you and good morning.
So let's proceed to understand this lovely poem. So ma'am, what are we going to learn today?
Could you please read the poem for the viewers?
Yeah, sure,
and for all of us.
So the poem A Photograph. The cardboard shows me how it was when the two girl cousins went paddling, each one holding one of my mother's hands, and she, the big girl, some 12 years or so. All three stood still to smile through their hair at the uncle with the camera. A sweet face, my mother's, that was before I was born. And the sea, which appears to have changed less, washed their terribly transient feet. Some 20-30 years later, she would laugh at the snapshot. See Betty and Dolly, she would say, and look how they dressed us for the beach. The sea holiday was her past, mine is her laughter. Both wry with the labored ease of loss. Now she is being dead nearly as many years as the girl lived, and of this circumstance there is nothing to say at all. Its silence silences. Such a lovely poem, ma'am.
Yes, and it's pleasure listening and reading poetry. And one more thing, Shilpa, when we read a literary piece of writing, it always leaves behind a trail of questions, explorations,
Right.
and insights into human life. So as you have said that we have to proceed and discuss the poem, I would say that this poem can be understood at three levels.
Okay.
Or we can say that it has three elements. One is that it is about a photograph. Second is it is about a story in the photograph. And third is that the poet talks about the questions about our existence, questions about our life and death. So when we begin analyzing or understanding this poem, first we need to understand that how beautifully Shirley Toulson has made use of this photograph. No, she starts by saying that it's a cardboard. But this is, I would say, a visual history. This picture, this photograph is like a visual history of an event in the life of the poet.
Poetess.
We can say it is a biopic, and we can also say that that a story is captured in the photograph, but it is not frozen. You know, I have given this title to this analysis of the poem, that there is a journey in time and space in this poem. So as we read this poem, we feel that there is a kind of mobility. We are at different levels of time and space. So when we begin, you have just read out the beautiful first stanza of the poem, which says that it talks about a seaside picnic. The mother of the poet, along with her two cousins, has visited a beach, a seaside, and they had gone there for a picnic, for fun, for a get-together. So when they went there, they really had a good time there. And you have also read that they smiled through their hair. Means they were really very happy, and they smiled at uncle who clicked the photograph. So they, they wanted to give their best smiles for that photograph. So it's about bonding among the three cousins. The mother of the poet holding the hands of her two younger cousins. Later on we come to know about their names also, Betty and Dolly, and they had gone there and they wanted to have some get together by the side of the sea, and the uncle was also there. So you know, it is, as I said, a journey within that picture that is being visualized and that is being read by the reader and the viewer. So this picnic was an event in the life, an important, delightful event in the life of the mother of the poet. But that event became a moment of the past. There is no imprint, no sign, no impression being left there on the sea beach about that event. That once three young girls, teenagers visited that place, no sign is left there. So as we move on to the second stanza, we reach another level of time and space. You know, the poet says that it is after 20-30 years. The mother of the poet again looks at that picture, again looks at that photograph. Now there is another story being lived through that photograph. Now when the mother looks at that photograph, she's again reminded of a time, you know, after 20-30 years. That is why I said it's a kind, photograph is a kind of a visual. So when you look at that visual, it has some connection, some relation with some event in your life. So it becomes very important, the photograph becomes important for the person. Now see, when she looked at that photograph after 20-30 years, again she is reminded, there is nostalgia there, there is a kind of recollection of that event. And she also remembered that how they were made to wear their best dresses because they had gone out for the picnic, and especially they wanted some photographs also. So it is a kind of human desire that we all want to preserve the memories, and when we want to preserve the memories through a photograph, there is an urge to give your best. It's always like this. So again we see the last two lines of the second stanza, where we come to know that that event has become a thing of past for the mother, and similarly we also come to know that the poet has lost her mother. So there is grief, there is a sense of shared grief, that both of them have lost something, something very good, something very happy in their lives. Now the poet cannot hear the laughter of her mother because she is no more with her, she has passed away, and the mother was unhappy, not so happy, very nostalgic, very melancholic, I would say, when she looked at the photograph after 20-30 years, because she was also reminded of an event that happened long time back, and maybe we don't know that she might have lost those cousins also, or might not have been in contact with those two cousins with whom she had gone for the picnic. So you know, the whole thing revolves around a very deeper question and a very deeper understanding of what life is actually. And when you come to the third stanza, the last stanza of the poem, as you have read it, that as there is nothing to talk about that photograph, that event is gone, the mother is gone, so there is nothing that we can talk about that photograph. So there is a silence, and that silence silences the whole photograph. Somewhere you have this feeling that the photograph speaks, that the photograph has a voice, and when we look at that photograph, it starts speaking to you. It starts reminding you of an event. It starts reminding you of the people with you have bonded, with whom you have lived your life, or with whom you have shared some kind of happiness. Right. So the photograph speaks. But once these the characters have passed away, that event is also not there, the the photograph becomes silent. Right. But I would say, as a reader, we always suggest to our young readers and to our teachers that we can also interpret the poem with our own understanding as well. You know, there is a very famous line by a philosopher, that the poet is dead. Once the poet gives the creation to the readers, now the poet is dead. The reader can reinterpret it. So in that sense, I would say the last two lines of the poem are very touching, but I would say that the photograph is silent. It is quiet, but it is not mute. Okay. It has not lost its voice. Maybe someone will come and again the photograph will start speaking. The third element which I have mentioned is about the questions of life and death, which the poet has dealt very deeply. You see, when we read the first stanza and we look at the last two lines of the stanza, where the poet says, "And the sea, which appears to have changed less, washed their terribly transient feet." Now see the comparison. The sea has changed less as compared to the terribly transient feet. So it gives you a message about the mortality of our life, that our life is short-lived. We are not going to live forever on this earth. Our life is fleeting. It will pass away. And as compared to the sea, again I would like to add here, when you read the poetry of early romantics, when you read the poems of Wordsworth, Keats and Shirley, you have this feeling that the nature is permanent and our life is transient. We are all mortals. One day we will all pass away, leaving behind our memories captured in the photograph. This is what the poet wants to say. But here you see Shirley Toulson. She is an English poet, 20th century poet, and she has written a lot about contemporary issues also. So here you see what she says, changed less. It is not that nature for her is something permanent as it was for Wordsworth or Keats, Shelley, but she says that it has changed less. But as compared to the human life, it has changed less, but the human life is terribly transient. Okay. So this is one way the poet wants to convey to us that our life, no matter, we may have happy moments in our life. We must enjoy those moments. We must capture the memories of those moments, but ultimately the life is transient. Right. Similarly, when you move on to the next stanza and you read the last lines, where he says, the sea holiday was her past, mine is her laughter, both wry, with the labored ease of loss. Beautifully said, I must say. She is talking about the cycle of life and death. You know, as human beings, we are trapped in this cycle of life and death. In the life of the poet, there is this tragedy. she has lost her mother. Similarly, in the life of the poet's mother, there is some, some grief in the form of loss of something which she has enjoyed at one point of time.
Right.
You know, that picnic became symbolic. That represents the happiness we have when we bond with each other. But once it goes away, and it is bound to go away, then what happens, at one point of time in our lives, we have to labor very hard to deal with our grief, to deal with the loss which we face in our life. So that is why, you know, this beautiful expression, both right. I mean, both have to deal with this grief, both have to work very hard, have to struggle to come over this grief,
right.
and which is a very integral part of human life. And the last part, as I said, that it talks about silence, it talks about there is nothing to say at all. It's silence, silences. Somewhere I would say that the poet has ended the poem with a very passive note, that there is nothing to say at all. Or maybe she is saying that a photograph is alive so long as there are narrators to narrate the story that is being captured, that is being embedded in that photograph. But I feel that when we read it in the classroom with young readers like you, we should go ahead. Teachers should ask the learners to go ahead. It says there is nothing to say at all. It's silence, silences. But as I said, that it is not dumb, it is not mute, it is not deaf, the photograph. It can be, it can come to life once again. So this is all about the way we should understand, I feel, this poem. The way she has dealt with the very basic question about our existence. The existential question, I would say, that we have a life, but this life is going to end one day. And secondly, that there might be a photograph that may narrate a story of your life, of my life, but once there is no narrator, it becomes silent. But it is not dead, it is not mute, I would add to it. So this is, I feel, it should be read and understood on these lines.
So ma'am, what I have noticed that the language is so simple. The
Yes.
Shirley's language of writing is just so simple.
Yes.
So what more you would like to add about the language?
Okay. Very good, Shilpa, and those who have read poems by romantics or classical poetry, if they have some taste of classical poetry or romantic poetry, they would certainly say that this is a very simple poem in the sense that the poet has picked up a very simple vocabulary.
Right.
You know, there is nothing so difficult about it. But what I say is that the thought that is being embedded in this poem makes it very intense. And you see, it is also said that the poetry is highly creative, noble and innocent profession.
Right.
Like the poets who write poetry, they have a very innocent profession of writing poetry. Now, why do they say it? You know, because the language of the poem, particularly this poem, you see, is free of all prejudices and biases. It's very simple. And it is so different from our everyday language,
right.
where there are symbols of power, there are symbols of hierarchy when we talk to each other in our everyday life. But when you read this poem, and when you look at the vocabulary and the language of this poem, you will find that the semantics of the poem, that is the meaning of the poem, is far more intense than the language of the poetry, of this poem. So I would say that I felt that when she might have, when she wrote this poem, she might have dwelled more in the language. Like she has picked up the words which anybody could understand, but you have to go beyond the words. Everything is not in the text that is in front of you, not in the words that those are in front of you, but you have to deal with the vocabulary, you have to deal with the words, how the words are related to each other. The use of the word rye.
Right.
That is, very beautifully woven into the poetry. And the way she said, the terribly transient. Terribly is a word which anybody can understand. But when you link it, you can't take it in isolation. You have to link it with transient. So when you link terrible with transient, it gives you a very different but very profound meaning. So this weaving of the words to give the actual meaning what she wants to convey may seem to us very simple, but I don't think it is that simple. But again, I would say, as I said it's always when we read something literary, the meaning is not on the surface. One might find that the vocabulary is simple, but the meaning might not be, as in this case.
Right. So ma'am, here we have got a question from Miss Sarita, who is teacher in a school, and she wants to understand, most of the time children faces problem in understanding or decoding a poem. So how we can help them to deal with it?
You see, decoding a poem. When we use the word decoding, we are not referring simply to understand the meanings of the word. I would suggest to Miss Sarita, as she is teaching and she is facing this problem, and this is a very common problem, I would say, but it begins very early in the life of the readers, that they develop this skill of understanding the poem not by the words, but actually what lies beneath the words. Now I give you one example. It might help Miss Sarita also, that when we say that read the title, a photograph. Okay. Now the title, a photograph, after reading the title, many things come in your mind. You start working, you start thinking at a level that what this poem could be about. You start predicting and guessing also that this might be about a photograph, a wedding photograph, a child's photograph, a photograph of an old person. Something comes to your mind. So as a teacher, I will bank upon these predictions with which the children will come to me. I will not try to make them understand that this is a photograph and this is the story of the photograph. But I would ask them to come up with their own responses. This is how we develop the skill of reading. Skill of reading is not that you read the lines, you can read the words, you can understand the meanings of the words, but what lies beneath those words and meanings. And one important thing is that most of the time, I'm not criticizing anybody, but what we have observed, that we go to the classroom with some kind of a determined meaning. and we pass on that knowledge which as I have gained to the learners.
Right.
So here comes the problem. You know, the learners never become independent readers of literature, of poem or a story. So they will always look forward to the teacher, what kind of explanation the teacher is going to give. So my suggestion is give them more and more poems. You have to go beyond the text also. Give them more and more poems for independent reading. Let them come with their questions. That will show you that how far have they understood and what they have understood in the poem. My explanation, teacher's explanation should come later on, once the children have explored the poem or a story.
So I hope Miss Sarita you have got the answer of your question, and the next question we have got from Mr. Gaurav. Actually he is a student and he wants to understand that ma'am, there is no pic in the poem, which actually makes us problematic for us to visualize the poem. So don't you think there should be a picture?
Deliberately there is no picture, to tell you the truth, and one reason is we expect that by the time children come in class 11th or 12th, this is in class 11th textbook, children should be able to visualize an image after reading the title of the poem. So deliberately it has not been given. You know, once you give a picture, you know, we have to be very careful in giving the illustrations in the textbook.
Right.
What's his name?
Mr. Gaurav.
Gaurav, I feel we have to be very careful when we give illustrations, because you see, if we would have given a picture of a poet's mother standing with cousins by her sides, it would have become very predictable for you. You know, the beauty of the poem, beauty of reading this poem is there is no picture and you have to recall your own experiences about the photograph, and you have to connect your experiences with the title of the poem so that you can move ahead in understanding the poem.
Right.
So it's a deliberate thing on our part.
Because the image is the first thing which a person sees. So
Yes.
So
And at this level, we expect our learners to decode even abstract thoughts as well, because it is higher order thinking skill.
Right. And we have got another question from Miss Priyanka. She wants to understand the meaning and of this circumstance. So here the meaning of circumstance, why they have used it, what kind of circumstances it is.
Okay, now she's been dead nearly as many years as that girl lived, and of this circumstance there is nothing to say at all. When the mother is dead, you see, and she is referring to the circumstance, which circumstance? That event by the side of the beach, the picnic they had by the seaside. Now the mother is dead and there is nobody to talk about that event, to talk about that circumstance. So here she is referring to the event, the picnic which they had by the seaside. So once the mother is dead, there is nobody to talk about that circumstance, about that event. So that is why she says that the picture has become silent.
So here we are taking another question from Miss Yukta, and she wants to understand, for a poem there are the several ways of interpreting it, but our teachers don't allow us to interpret the way we want. So what we can do?
See, a very good question, I must say, and I think I have answered that also.
You have answered
that teachers should give these opportunities of interpreting the poem, understanding the poem, the way learners have understood it. You know, the main thing is when we read something, if we understand, then what happens? That we connect with our own experiences, and that is very important for understanding the poem. So I would suggest, what's her name please?
Yukta.
Yukta, I would suggest, I'm happy that you have raised this question, and I would suggest that read more and more poems on your own, keep a diary, keep on writing about what you read and how you read and what you understand, and enjoy your reading sessions as much as you can.
Okay. So here we have come to the end of our today's show. Thank you, ma'am, for giving us much of information and making this poem so lovely to us.
Thank you very much.
So if you have any query or the question if you may want to ask, then you can dial into our toll-free number or can drop an email to us. Till then, take care and keep watching Kishore Manch.
Thank you.